I am so excited to bring to you my personal journey. First, I would like to thank my friend Michelle. As I was reading this story and thinking about this video, I noticed I wasn't talking about my father. And there's a reason for that. He just wasn't present in my life. As I grew older, I was very curious about my father. Having my grandparents raise me early on in my life due to my mother's schizophrenia, I was just accustomed to the lack of a father. As an adult, I can see now how that would play a huge role in my life. I did always wonder about my father, and once the age of DNA testing was more common, I did a 23andMe test. At that time, I did the test as more of a curiosity about genetics and ancestry. About a year into the results, I received a message from a woman. There was a match. Her and another woman had a huge connection with me, but this woman specifically reached out to me, and she actually had a match that said she was my mother, and it had taken me aback because obviously she wasn't my mother. And she said, "Hi, we match, and it says I'm your mother, but I know I'm not your mother, and this is curious." And so we corresponded a little bit, and she was from the California area, which is where I grew up as a child and was born. We were very curious as to why our DNA came back as her as my mom, obviously. So we sent in our information to a DNA detective. And when the information came back, the DNA detective had determined that she was not my mother, but my aunt. And that the only reason that this would be because her brother would be my father. And so that's how I found out who my real father was, thinking somebody else was my father growing up. So in that process, I found out that this man had 3 children. It would be my older brother and then 2 younger brothers. So I have 3 half brothers. One older brother who didn't want anything to do with any of this information. So he's completely doesn't want anything to do with me. And then my father doesn't want anything to do with me. And then the 2 younger brothers. In fact, he asked he and his children and his sister to stop all contact with me altogether. Throughout the process, my 2 younger brothers did contact me, and it was a beautiful experience. Unfortunately, my youngest brother tragically lost his life shortly after the process, and we did have plans to meet up halfway in Las Vegas. Due to the complexity of the story and my DNA journey, I will do a video dedicated just for that grief. Some of the disclaimer in this video is it depicts abuse of a child, but I did want to share with you some of the disenfranchised grief that I do go through. There's quite a bit of different types of grief, but one of the main griefs you'll see that I go through, in addition to losing grandparents and my mother and all the different losses, the disenfranchised grief that I do go through with right out of the gate, coming out of the womb, I don't have a parent, and then losing my mother and kind of not even having her there from the beginning. So without further ado, I would like to share my personal journey with you, part 1. Hi, welcome to another installment of the Grieve and Grow Podcast. I am so excited today to introduce my friend, Michelle. We are here today to share my personal journey. Let's introduce Michelle.
Hi, I live here in Orem, and I've known Sheila for several years. I've been married for 35 years and 2 daughters. I am a family historian. I do that professionally, and especially love hearing people's stories and how it relates to their lives. And so I'm so honored to be here, Sheila, to have you share your story with me. And I guess we'll just go ahead and get started.
That's
right?
exciting.
Okay.
One of the reasons I chose you, Michelle, to hold space for me today was because it's taken me a long time to get my courage up to share my story. And I think it takes a special kind of person to share your story. I've been able to share my story or hear and sit and listen to other people share their story. And they've often said to me, you're so easy to talk to and you just have a way about you. And I think that you have that gift as well and that quality. I think that it's going to be easy for me to do that with you today. So thank you for letting me share my story with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't think we've talked much about my history or anything. And so it's nice. It's not something that you have to repeat. And I haven't talked much about that.
I love that.
So thank you for co-hosting with me today.
Well, you're very welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you for your kind words and for asking me. Well, let's start out, Sheila, with tell me about your childhood, where it all began.
Yeah, that's easy for me. So I'm an only child. I was raised by my grandparents. They were in their 70s. They had already raised their own set of children. They had 3 sons. I know that one of them had passed away, and they had adopted my mother. My mother was born to a woman who was an alcoholic, and she had my mom, who had fetal alcohol syndrome. And I guess when my mother was born, she could fit into the palm of your hand, is what everyone told me. And because she was born premature. And that was the same story with her brother. So being born with fetal alcohol syndrome, we now know that it causes a lot of schizophrenia. So my mom was raised by my grandparents, and they had never had a daughter before. And so they were really excited. There's been a lot of controversy in our family that the brothers didn't really love that my mom was adopted, and they were quite jealous. So that's just hearsay. But growing up, that was kind of a sore, sensitive subject. So anyway, they raised my mom, and she was tiny. She was just a little 4'9" woman. She did come. Her father was Mexican Native American, and her mother was a white woman who lived just down the street from my grandparents. And they knew this woman, but every time they were down there, my mom was just horribly neglected, left in her crib, not fed. And so that's what caused them to take her in. And so they took her in and ended up adopting her. Long story short, years later, my mom got pregnant. She was quite young. She was pregnant with me, and my mom decided to keep me. And after that, she had a nervous breakdown, a quite severe nervous breakdown, severe mental illness. They were going to put her in a mental facility. I don't know all of the story. I've been told multiple things about that story. One of the stories that have stuck, that I have heard the same story about, my mom's told me the same story. She hallucinated quite badly. She was screaming. She said the snakes were coming. The schizophrenia was really, really bad. She stood on a chair. She thought, people were coming to get her. They wanted to take her into a mental institution and do a lobotomy on her at the time in California, like a full lobotomy. My grandparents said no and sought better treatment for her. And that's when they moved her to Utah. At the time, Utah was the place that had the best mental health. Believe it or not, Utah has always had some of the best mental health.
Okay, so one question there. So what threw her into that schizophrenia? Was there a cause that you know now?
Fetal alcohol syndrome.
Okay. And maybe some postpartum depression?
Absolutely.
Type of thing? Okay.
That's what really set it off. I wish we'd talk more about postpartum. I know a lot of more women are coming forward. After having a baby, that is such a hard time. And she was young, and the chemical imbalance that we already struggle with after having a baby is so hard on us. But she had me, and it was just really hard on her. And so with the schizophrenia and the postpartum, she just really struggled. And at the time, too, I think my grandparents were just really hard on her. On my birth certificate, it says father unknown. Now that I know now, they knew who my father was, but they said that they didn't. There were several men that were tested. There's a lot of gray area. I know now who my father is, but at the time they said they didn't. So there was unknown father at the time. So there was no one present. I didn't know my father my whole life. And so that just means that my mom was having to kind of just wing this on her own. So my grandparents raised me, and my mother was sent to to Utah, where she was really ill. They put her on all kinds of things, lithium and cogentin and a lot of medications that were just, I remember she shook. She had a really bad handshake, and she also was really promiscuous and partied, and she's just wild. She was real wild.
And when she was sent to Utah, where were you?
With my grandparents in California.
In California, she was sent to Utah to live with someone, or?
She lived in group home settings where there was Wasatch Mental Health was at the center of everything.
Okay, so she was in a group home.
She could live in her own apartment setting, but she had people she checked in with, and she would get shots and check in with a doctor. So she lived in her own her own apartment, but she would check in with a mental health specialist, and she would check in once a week with a therapist. And so they had more of a structure here in Utah.
Okay.
For her. And she stayed with that the duration of her whole life. She was always part of the Wasatch Mental Health System. It was a pivotal part of what she did. And she never was able to hold a job or get a driver's license. She just never did. One time there was a story where one time they tried to send me to live with her. I think I was about 2 years old. There's a photo of me with her at the age of 2 years old. They shipped me here to Utah. I was in the park with her, and unfortunately, she was held up at gunpoint and robbed. And I was in the stroller, I know, and that sent her reeling. And of course, she had a nervous breakdown. Of course, she was a terrified mom and freaked out. And they're like, "See, you can't handle it." And she screamed. And anyway, they shipped me back to my grandparents. The reason I was told that they had to send me to my mother's was because my grandparents were too old to care for me, and I legally needed to be with my mother. And at that point, this is just what I was told. My grandparents were not supposed to be taking care of me. They were just too old to have me. And so they started going on the run. They moved me to Texas and all over different places, Utah, back to California. And at that point, we just kept moving. And so I've moved quite a bit my whole life. But they were just, with power of attorney, continued to move with me. And we moved quite a bit.
Boy, they really loved you
They did.
to do that.
They did. I have never, ever felt unloved or uncared for. My grandfather was my everything. I just have vivid memories of my grandpa taking such tender care of me as a child.
And as older people like that, being willing to just pack up and leave. Wow.
Yeah.
That says a lot.
Yeah. I do have awful memories of the way they treated my mom, which was kind of hard. I mean, I remember my mom screaming and fighting with my grandparents. I can't imagine being a daughter and being mentally ill. So there was a lot of those kind of memories, but I was a child. I don't know. It's hard. And then you throw alcohol in the mix, you throw mental illness in the mix. I just can't even imagine. And then you've got my mom living with boyfriends. I don't know. So, there's a lot. There's just a lot to unpack there. It's so much in the past for me. And then flash forward to when I was 12 years old. I was in American Fork, Utah, and I was in the 4th grade, I believe. No, let me rewind a little bit. I was in the 3rd grade, and my grandparents were getting up there in age, and my grandmother was very ill. For a long time, my grandma was really sick. I have a lot of memories of her being in a hospital bed, and as a child, I was just used to it. She always just had a hospital bed in our front room. And I know that was odd. I always had a lot of heartache because I never had like the parents, and we weren't LDS, and I lived in a predominantly LDS community. So that was always kind of painful. None of the kids wanted to play with me. That's just how it was in predominantly, cultural communities when there wasn't the same culture as you. And being an only child, that was so hard. I didn't have siblings to play with. And so I just remember thinking, gosh, I just want to be part of that kind of community. And that was painful. And my grandmother, she was a smoker. And so I always went to school smelling like smoke, and it bothered me. And the kids are always like, "Oh, I can't play with you because you smell like smoke," or "My mom won't let me play with you because you guys aren't LDS." That was painful. I remember as an adult, I always thought I'm never going to be that parent, and I certainly am not. But that was hard. So grandma was in a hospital bed, and I didn't realize the severity of it, but she had emphysema for years and was really, really sick. And grandpa, I just have vivid memories of him, like her bath once a week. He would pick her up in his arms and he would carry her up the stairs and give her once a week bath. And I think partly that's kind of why I'm a caregiver now, just looking back on all the care that he provided for her and care for me. I mean, he took me to school every morning. He took me school shopping and made my breakfast and cooked every single meal every day. So there's a lot of care that went into how I was raised by my grandparents. I remember towards the end, before they had passed, she was just too sick to do anything. And one of the harder memories I have is they just said, grandma's too sick to go Christmas shopping. They just gave me some money. I think I was in like 4th grade at the time. And they said, they sent me down the street to go Christmas shopping. I bought all my Christmas presents and wrapped them up and put them under the tree. And I just remember thinking, this is so weird, but it was kind of fun, but they were so old. But I'm going to rewind a little bit to, I was in the 3rd grade, and I had a lot of cousins. My uncle, which was my grandparents' son, he had 2 uncles. They both were truck drivers, and they kind of stayed close to my grandparents because it was their sons. One of my uncles, my Uncle Bob, there was 11 kids involved. So, one of his older sons that lived close to me. We were the same age. He was just a year older than me. I played with them a lot in the neighborhood in the trailer park that we lived in, but he had some problems. He was a disturbed child, and there was some abuse there. He was really mean to his brothers and sisters, and I've gone through a lot of therapy, and so I'm through that now, but at the time it was a lot going on. There was some sexual abuse that I can't speak for what happened with him and his siblings, but for me, I know I suffered some sexual abuse from him. But during the time when I was in third grade, I was on the trampoline, and he deliberately jumped on the trampoline and broke my leg. And I will never forget what happened, because my leg broke, and it broke in a severe way that it was like this, and it broke completely in half like this, and the bone collapsed on top of itself. And I just remember laying on the trampoline, and I was excruciating pain, and I just laid there screaming my head off, and I was rushed to the emergency room, and it took about a year. I was in the hospital for 3 months to 6 months in what they call traction. I've learned recently that they don't do that anymore. It's something that they don't do, but traction is where you lay down on your back and they put a weight on one part of the bone and they pull it back together. And then the other half of my experience was at home in a half body cast. And a lot of that, after that happened, they took off the cast and I just moved on with my life. But then years later, as an adult, after I had my daughter Destiny, I started having triggers. And I started talking to my husband about that. And I'm like, I have PTSD. Something's happening. Something's going on. I didn't know it was PTSD at the time, but things were happening inside of me as my own daughter was starting to grow up. And
Sheila, let me ask you this. So when you say triggers, do you mean you remembered this happened, or it brought you back to that moment?
No, none of that happened. I just started having panic. Hey. I would be in a grocery store and I would be pushing my daughter around and I was panicking for no reason. I was terrified that bad things were going to happen to my daughter, and I wasn't making any connections. I didn't know what was going on, and I had no idea. I couldn't sleep. I became an insomniac to the point where I wasn't sleeping for days on end. Like 2 or 3 days, I started spiraling. I kept thinking my daughter was going to get kidnapped. People were following me. Bizarre things were happening in my world. My head was in a space that was completely unhealthy in a way that I couldn't explain. And it all had to do with my daughter being abducted. It was odd. So I went to the doctor and I just said, something's not right with me. What's going on? And I was having a lot of problems walking, and I kept blowing my knees out. I kept blowing my left knee and my right knee, and I always had a limp, and I always had these hip problems, and I'm just like, what is going on? And so finally my doctor just said, let's do some x-rays. Let's talk about, what we can do. And finally I was sitting in the doctor's office, and it came out of me organically. I said, when I was younger, I had a leg that was broken. And this is what happened. This was the circumstances. And I explained about the sexual abuse and this cousin that was in prison. And she said, Sheila, you need to see a therapist. And in the therapy sessions, it came to light that I had some PTSD.
And you had no therapy before this?
No.
In your life?
Not for this, no. No. And I had come through a divorce, and I'd gone from that. And it basically, what the diagnosis had been, that I had just been in survival mode since I was a child. So I can kind of rewind now and put a bigger picture to the situation. What had happened is I was raised by my grandparents, and when I was 12 years old, my grandma passed away suddenly. I mean, not suddenly, she was old. But first my grandfather passed, and he wasn't expected to pass. And it was my grandma in the nursing home who was going to pass. I was living with them, and one day my grandpa came to me and said, hey, I need you to go live with your cousin for a little while, your aunt. And I said, why? What's going on? So that was shocking to me. I said, okay, well, I want to go home. Why do I have to live with these people? And so it was the cousin who had broken my leg and who was not very kind. And I said, okay. but I want to live with you. They're like, well, you need to just live with them for a minute. And suddenly he passed away.
Did he know he was going to pass away, you
No,
think?
he was the stronger one. He had a sudden heart attack, and it was a Wednesday. And then 1 week later, my grandma passed. And at the time, I was in complete shock. As a kid, I mean, so the adults, I can see that they just lost their parents. And so they're obviously going through it. But at the time, nobody was there for me. Nobody.
The only people that were there for you are gone, both of them.
Yes. And, I forgive everybody. Because that must have been hard for everyone to lose a double death a week apart. But there was a child in the mix, and it was me. I just remember if it was in my head or if I heard it, like, what are we going to do with Sheila? What are we going to do with Sheila? And they put me with my aunt and uncle who had my cousins, the 11 of them. And it was a nightmare. They lived in the country. There was dairy goats. I hated it. And my aunt and uncle, they thought that I was ungrateful and I was trying to run away because I didn't want to live in the country and I was being snotty, but I was being sexually molested by my older cousin. So that's why I hated it there.
Did you ever tell any
Yes.
adults
Oh,
what was going on?
I told my cousin who was 1 year younger. And in my mind, as a child, I thought, oh, this is going to be my saving grace. But he was just a child, too. What was he to do? This cousin that was at the time molesting me and being inappropriate with me, he got sent away to live in a group home because he was a deviant doing other things. There was other things going on. And I thought I had caused him to go away. And it was awful. This other things happened. So I was bounced back and forth to live with my own mother, who at the time was very abusive. She would ground me, and she was mentally ill and reeling from the loss of her parents and had no idea how to cope with that. And so then I was having behaviors, she was having behaviors, and we were oil and fire together. And it was like two teenagers trying to live together. And so I've got this mentally ill mother trying to now take care of a daughter that she doesn't know how to take care of. And I can't stand the woman. And she's just trying to raise me. But she's a partier. In my room is the spare bedroom where the men are coming to party with her boyfriend. And it was just awful. I mean, I look back on that and I think, oh, she's trying to do what she can do. I'm just trying to survive. But she's super abusive. She would ground me from food. I mean, I think that was an issue. She would lock the fridge, just different kind of weird things like that. So there was
there any place when all this is going on, Sheila, that you felt safe?
I did have another aunt that lived in the country across the street, and I thought that she was my ally. I thought that she was the one I could turn to, but she was very verbally abusive to me. She was hard on me about my weight. She would put me on a diet when I lived with her as well. And my uncle that she was married to, so my grandparents' other son, was very mean to me. He was the other truck driver. There just really wasn't much safety. It was hard. And my mother adored her brothers. And they were mean and unkind to her. So she thought the sun rised and set on these people, and they just weren't very nice to her. And so when her parents died, it was hard because it just kind of felt like we were the outcasts of the family. There was a point where I ran away. I ran to the state, and I just said, there's got to be something for me. Is there a program for me? I mean, I literally ran away to the state of Utah, and I ran to, not Child Protective Services, it was called, I can't remember what it was called, Youth Services. I said, is there a place for me? There's got to be something for me, and they just sent me back to my mom. So I mean, I remember desperately seeking for some kind of youth protection at the time. I'm like, my mom's mentally ill. All she does is party. She's nuts. There was nothing for me.
What about school? Did you feel safe at school?
Not really. I mean, I was in a gang heavy area in downtown Salt Lake, and I was being bullied. There wasn't much for me there. I lived in the back and forth between the country and the city. I just bounced around a lot. There was a lot It was a lot. I moved a lot.
Okay. So that's a lot for a child to go through.
Yeah.
My question for you is, what brought you through that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Interestingly enough, even before all of that happened, there were hard times before my grandparents died. There were times when I was with my mom and I was uncomfortable, or when I was even with my grandparents and I just remember feeling uncomfortable just from different circumstances or different things. And I always remember having this small voice inside of it was in my heart and in my head. And I can't explain where it came from or why, but there was always something that whispered to me, this is not everything, you're meant for something bigger. And I was never raised with religion. My grandparents were Catholic. Sometimes my grandpa would take me to Catholic church. There was never a big warm fuzzy at the Catholic church or anything like that. But there was always this one small voice that always whispered to me. In fact, I remember there's just these times where I would do this mental head check where I would be in the middle of the country. I can specifically remember just as a little kid, and I was looking out at this vast, after being a city girl, riding the city bus to the mall downtown where there's I would ride the bus, but I would be out in the middle of the country and thinking, this is horrible. I've gone from being a city mouse to a country mouse, and I'm just stuck out here and nobody knows me, nobody understands me, and I'm being, molested. And I just remember this small voice being like, you're meant for something bigger. It's going to be okay. And that voice has always been a part of me, even since a small child. And it's the same small voice that it's not in my head. It's something bigger.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's always been something there telling me that you're meant for something bigger. And that's always been a comforter for me. And I don't equate it with religion. It's a spiritual thing I've always carried with me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a very spiritual comfort for me.
Wow.
So so after my grandparents died, I really felt like I went on my own. I felt like I just moved around and I was bounced from family member to family member. And as I look back at it as an adult, I really do feel like that's when I kind of started my adulthood. I have different family members who are like, oh yeah, you came and lived with us, but nobody really raised me. At that point is when I started raising myself.
Well, yeah, you're a kid going down and getting your own Christmas presents. I mean, even from that's, although it was a nice thing for the grandparents to do, that's not something a kid would normally do. So
So, and then there became a point where I was living with my aunt, Sam and Tom. It's the other brother and sister of my mom's. I thought things were going really well at that time. I wasn't living with the cousin that was molesting me. And I was living with my cousin, one of their children, and he had AIDS at the time. And it was really sad. I felt so bad. And he was getting close to being terminal, where he was getting bedbound. Home health and hospice were getting close to coming in, and I could see my aunt deteriorating. But it was the closest to stability I ever really had. I had friends. I was riding the bus from a little town called Fairfield, Utah, into the city of Lehigh. It was like a 45-minute commute. But I had stability. I had friends, and I had got my driver's license, and it felt stable to me. And one day my aunt, she took me to see my mom in Salt Lake City for the weekend, and then she just never picked me back up. She said, you know what? You're not coming back. And that, for some reason, that abandonment was the worst abandonment I ever experienced. I think for me, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. I cried and sobbed, I think, for a week straight. I don't know if I ever really cried about my grandparents' death. I don't know if I ever cried about ever anything until that point. I think, and I called her on a payphone at least 100 times. Why? Let me come home. And she said, no, this is what it's got to be. And
She didn't give you a reason? Just sorry.
Later on, she did. She said, I I couldn't handle what was going on with my son dying at home. I just couldn't handle it, and I didn't want to expose you to that. I think that was her excuse at the time. Some of it might have been financial, having to take care of me, but I just...
And what was your mom's reaction?
Oh, whatever, I'll take her. But I mean, they were living in a 1-bedroom apartment, and I was 16, and the only way for me to feel like I was going to be accepted by her partying boyfriend and her was to do what they did. So I started smoking. But before that, I just missed my friends in Lehigh. I missed my life. I just wanted to be a normal kid. So I got a job. I got 2 jobs. I worked in American Fork. And for those of you who don't know, they're about 30 miles apart. I went to school still, and I lived in Salt Lake. As a 16-year-old, I had 2 jobs, and I worked. And that's a lot for a 16-year-old kid.
And this is at the same school?
In Lehigh.
Okay.
And
so you're at your same school.
So here are all these kids, cheerleaders, and just these little Mormon kids trying to live their life. And I was working 2 jobs and trying to live my life. And I had some really good friends at the time that were also going through some hardships. I'm still friends. But I worked my guts out until I could afford my own car. And so then I had my own car, and things got so bad at home with my mom. And so I asked my friend if I could live with them. And their mom let me live with them on one condition, that I would start taking the discussions from the church. They were LDS from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so I agreed, and I ended up joining their church at the time. And so I got baptized, and then 3 days later, Child Services came and took me from their home and put me in Child Protective Services with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It felt like it hurt. It felt like it kind of felt like an abandonment again.